The white woman, Linda Shore, grabbed the bride's bouquet straight from the trembling hands of the little flower girl and hurled it into the gutter. Gasps tore through the garden as the bright petals scattered across the sidewalk like fragments of stolen joy. Without hesitation, Linda swung her arm across the wedding cake, toppling it into the grass. Frosting splattered the lace tablecloth, the layered creation lying in ruins at her feet. Her voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the stunned silence. "Get this ghetto out of my sight before I call 911 on every last one of you." The groom, Marcus Reed, stood motionless, jaw locked tight, his dark eyes burning with fury he refused to release. His bride, Naomi Carter, clutched the hem of her gown with shaking hands, tears streaking her perfectly powdered face. 60 wedding guests, friends, family, elders, children, watched in horror, their laughter and applause strangled by the venom of one woman's hate. What would you do if your wedding was shattered, not by an accident or a storm, but by someone who despised the very sight of your joy because of the color of your skin? Welcome to BlackStories. Before we dive into this thrilling and heartbreaking story, click the subscribe button, drop your comments, and let us know where you're watching from, because this one cuts deeper than most. The day had begun like a dream. Golden sunlight streamed across the lush community garden, where rows of white chairs lined the green lawn. Strings of violins whispered a melody of love, the scent of roses and lavender filling the air. Naomi had walked down the aisle glowing, her grandmother's heirloom locket resting against her chest, her long veil trailing behind her. The guests had risen with joy in their eyes, clapping softly as she joined Marcus beneath an arch draped in flowers. It was a day carefully planned, painfully saved for, and eagerly awaited. For Naomi, it was more than a wedding. It was a reclamation of dignity, proof that her love could blossom publicly and unapologetically. For Marcus, the newly elected mayor of the city, it was a vow not just of love, but of strength, a promise to stand beside her in every battle, public or private. But Linda Shore had been watching all along. From her porch across the street, she had glared at the gathering, whispering under her breath about noise, permits, and the wrong kind of people. Every laugh that floated over the hedge tightened her jaw. Every clap of joy seemed to scrape against her nerves. She had muttered to herself about property values, about how these people brought trouble wherever they went. And as the vows were spoken, her bitterness swelled into rage. So she acted. She stormed across the lawn in her pressed beige slacks and spotless white blouse, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears like a mask of false order. Her entrance was a thunderclap, an interruption that yanked everyone from joy into dread. She seized the bouquet, her pale fingers clutching it as if it symbolized the theft of her world. She hurled it away, sending petals spiraling through the air like confetti at a funeral instead of a wedding. She shoved the cake, its collapse echoing the collapse of innocence in that moment. "Call the police, Linda," someone muttered from the back, one of her friends, emboldened by her audacity. And Linda didn't hesitate. She raised her phone, dialing with a smirk of self-righteous power, her voice already rehearsing the line she would deliver. "Suspicious crowd, loud, aggressive, don't know if they belong here." Naomi's chest tightened. She had seen too many stories like this on the news, too many hashtags carved from tragedy. She pressed her trembling hands against her dress, trying to hold herself together, trying not to let Linda see her crumble. Children in the front row buried their faces against their mothers, asking in whispers why the police were coming. Marcus's best man, Jamal, took a step forward, but Marcus raised a hand, a silent command for restraint. His jaw flexed, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "Let her finish," he murmured. He knew the danger of escalating, the danger of a black man meeting rage with anything but calm. Still, his heart thundered in his chest. He was the mayor, but at that moment, Linda didn't see a mayor. She didn't see a groom, a man, a leader. She saw only a threat, cloaked in skin she had decided was dangerous. The garden had fallen into an awful silence, broken only by Linda's venom and the distant wail of sirens approaching. The officiant stood frozen, Bible trembling in his hands. Naomi's grandmother clutched her cane, tears running down her cheeks, as if she had seen this story too many times before, only in harsher, bloodier endings. Linda strutted across the aisle, phone pressed to her ear, her voice pitched high with false fear. "Yes, officer, they're out here right now. No, I don't feel safe. Yes, there are too many of them." She gestured broadly at the wedding guests, as if love itself were an act of criminal defiance. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights danced across the hedges, staining the roses with the colors of authority. Tires crunched against gravel as two patrol cars skidded to a stop just beyond the garden gates. Doors slammed. Uniformed officers emerged, hands hovering near holsters, scanning the crowd with suspicion that had been primed by Linda's lies. The guests stiffened. Mothers pulled their children closer. A quiet ripple of panic moved through the gathering. For Naomi, the world narrowed to the sound of her own pulse. Each thud echoing with memories of names she had seen turned into headlines. She gripped Marcus's hand tightly, her nails digging into his skin, silently pleading for this not to end in tragedy. An officer's voice rang out, hard and commanding. "Who's in charge here?" The question wasn't innocent. It carried the weight of accusation, as if leadership meant culpability, as if celebration meant defiance. Eyes darted toward Marcus, but the officer's gaze was already scanning, measuring, searching for the problem. Naomi inhaled sharply, fighting to steady her voice, fighting to believe this day could still belong to her. But as Linda folded her arms smugly and the officers stepped onto the lawn, every ounce of joy seemed to slip away, replaced with a heavy fear that pressed down like chains. And still, the wedding hung suspended in silence, waiting to see what would be stripped away next. The pristine white chairs were still lined in perfect rows, flower petals scattered across the grass like confetti from a celebration cut short. Yet the garden no longer felt like a sanctuary of love. It had been transformed into a stage of suspicion. The geometry of police squad cars boxed in the venue, their flashing lights staining the roses with a false sense of menace. The officers moved with a caution that felt less like professionalism and more like presumption. They approached as if danger waited behind every smile, as if joy itself could be hostile. Their eyes swept over the guests without warmth, hands resting far, too comfortably on their belts. And in the middle of it all stood Linda Shore, her arms folded tightly, her chin raised with satisfaction, as though her presence had been validated by the very sound of those sirens. "Thank you for calling, ma'am," one officer told her first, his tone laced with respect. He never glanced at Naomi Carter, the bride still trembling at the altar. He never acknowledged Marcus Reed, the groom who stood steady, holding his bride's hand. Instead, he treated Linda as the reasonable one, the concerned citizen whose word carried weight. Naomi's stomach clenched. She could feel her humiliation deepen with every second that passed, as though her love, her gown, her very presence needed permission to exist. The officer finally turned toward her, not to apologize, not to ask if she was all right, but to demand, "Do you have proof this space is reserved? Identification, paperwork, something to show you belong here?" The words struck like a whip. She could hardly believe them. This was her wedding. She had paid, planned, prayed for this day. And yet, to him, her belonging was in question. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. "This is our wedding venue. We signed a contract months ago. Do you have that contract with you?" The officer interrupted, his brows arched with impatience. Naomi's tears welled, threatening to spill. She fumbled with her clutch bag, pulling out folded papers, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped them. The officer took the pages with a flat expression, scanning them without urgency. Meanwhile, behind him, two white joggers passed the fence line, earbuds in, nodding casually at the scene as though it were nothing more than a sideshow. No one stopped them. No one asked if they belonged. Jamal, the best man, clenched his fists, his broad shoulders tightening with rage. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. He pulled out his phone, dialing the city parks department, his voice low but sharp as he explained the harassment taking place. Naomi's Aunt Rochelle, her silver hair glinting under the afternoon sun, reached for her niece's arm. "Baby, keep your head up," she whispered. "Don't let them see you break." Linda, meanwhile, played her role of innocence with skill. Her voice quivered with false sincerity as she told the officers, "I just didn't feel safe. There were so many of them. I wasn't sure if this was authorized. I only wanted to protect the neighborhood." The DJ, still standing by his equipment, was approached by another officer. "We'll need you to keep the music down," the officer said, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "You might be in violation of the noise ordinance." "But I checked the limits," the DJ protested. "We're well within city guidelines." His words fell flat. The officer scribbled something on his pad, as if truth were negotiable depending on who spoke it. Naomi's humiliation grew unbearable. She stood there in her wedding gown, the fabric heavy with tears and sweat, her dignity being stripped piece by piece. She could feel the weight of every gaze, her guests, her grandmother, the children, all watching her be forced to justify her joy. Marcus remained still but not silent. His hand tightened around Naomi's, grounding her. Quietly, he slipped his phone from his pocket and sent a text to his staffer at City Hall. His words were simple: "Supervisor on scene. Get here now." When an officer finally addressed him, it was with dismissiveness. "And you are?" The tone made it clear. Whoever he was, it didn't matter. Not yet. Not until Marcus chose to reveal it. For now, he let the silence stretch, his posture unbending, his gaze unwavering. He knew the danger of ego, the risk of declaring power too soon. Naomi's mind drifted back, unbidden, to the day Marcus had been sworn in as mayor. She remembered the pride, the hope that his leadership would mean change. Now, standing beside him, she realized the cruel irony, that even as mayor, even in a tuxedo, even with every credential and title, he could still be reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin. The officer's radio crackled, a voice cutting through the tension. "Supervisor en route." Linda's lips curled into a smirk, certain the cavalry was coming for her defense, certain justice would bend in her favor. But Marcus only exhaled, a slow breath through his nose. He knew what was coming, and the garden braced itself for whatever that truth would reveal. Gravel crunched as a third patrol car pulled up, its engine humming low like a predator circling prey. The chatter of radios faded into silence when the door opened and a woman in uniform stepped out. Sergeant Elena Park adjusted her cap, her stride confident but measured as she scanned the scene before her. Toppled cake, shaken guests, officers stiff with uncertainty, and a blonde woman standing in the center as if she owned the world. Every eye turned toward her as she approached. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, weighing every detail without missing a beat. She walked past Linda Shore first, who reached out with a breathless eagerness, as though she had summoned a savior. "Sergeant, thank goodness. I'm the one who called." This crowd was getting out of hand. Elena didn't slow. Her eyes swept beyond Linda and landed squarely on Marcus Reed. The moment she saw him, her spine straightened. Recognition washed across her features in an instant. She halted, heels clicking against the pavement, and then, with a crispness that cut the tension like a blade, she spoke. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor." The words rang out like a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through the garden. Officers who had been puffing their chests seconds before now froze in place, their hands slipping quietly away from their belts. Naomi's tears still glistened on her cheeks, but now her breath caught for another reason. Vindication had arrived. Marcus inclined his head slightly, calm but unyielding. "Sergeant Park," he said, his voice steady, carrying authority without raising its volume. Linda's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as though the English language had suddenly betrayed her. She stumbled back a step, her earlier bravado crumbling. "Wait, he's what?" The mayor. Sergeant Park shifted her attention back to the officers, her tone sharpening. Report. One of them cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. Caller reported suspicious gathering, possible disturbance. We were following up. Suspicious. Park repeated, her eyebrow arched. Her gaze flicked to the wedding arch, the white dress, the musicians still holding their instruments mid-note, the guests frozen as if captured in a photograph. This is a wedding, a permitted event, with the mayor of this city standing before you. The silence was suffocating. Linda flailed for excuses, her words tumbling out in disarray. I didn't know. No one told me. How was I supposed to? You were supposed to mind your own business. Aunt Rochelle snapped from the front row, her cane thumping against the ground. Applause broke out in a ripple, guests emboldened now that the truth had shattered Linda's performance. Sergeant Park turned back to Marcus and Naomi, her face softening. On behalf of this department, I apologize for the interruption. We'll be clearing the area immediately. Naomi's hand squeezed Marcus's, her dignity slowly returning as she lifted her chin. But Marcus wasn't finished. No, he said firmly, his voice carrying across the lawn. I want this documented. Every detail of this call. Every word that was said. Linda stammered. It was just a misunderstanding, I swear. I didn't mean. Hart's expression was flat, unreadable. We'll separate parties and file the report. Caller will remain on site for questioning. Linda's smirk, once sharp and triumphant, dissolved into fear. Her arms, folded in defiance moments ago, now hung limp at her sides. As Park issued quiet orders, another detail emerged, one that sent the story spiraling beyond the garden walls. A young freelance videographer, hired to capture the ceremony, had not stopped recording. His camera had followed every moment. Linda's intrusion, her tantrum, the police arrival, the revelation of Marcus's identity. And even now, while the garden simmered with tension and relief, his phone buzzed. The footage was already uploading, already racing across timelines and feeds faster than any police report could catch up. Naomi looked toward Marcus, her heart still pounding. The ceremony they had dreamed of had been fractured, scarred. But as the world shifted around them, she realized something. Their story was no longer confined to this garden. It had become a mirror, one the entire city would be forced to look into. The video did not stay in the garden. Within hours, it had burst through phone screens and into the bloodstream of the internet. Clips of Linda's tantrum, the ruined bouquet, the toppled cake, and the officers treating her like a savior while Naomi was forced to justify her own wedding scrolled endlessly across timelines. Hashtag swelled. Strangers who had never met Naomi and Marcus now dissected their humiliation over dinner tables and office desks. Some are outraged, others dismissive. Not everything is about race, commenters insisted, their denial echoing like the same old refrain. City Hall could not ignore it. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones outstretched, demanding statements. The chief of police issued a carefully worded apology, calling it an unfortunate miscommunication. But that wasn't enough. The footage had made the city a case study in bias, and the mayor was no longer just a groom. He was the man at the center of a racial reckoning. Marcus's inbox filled with demands for comment. He read them all, but he resisted the urge to make this about himself. This is bigger than me, he told Naomi one night, their living room dark except for the glow of a laptop screen. If they see only the mayor, they'll miss the truth. This happens to families who don't have a title to protect them. Naomi, weary but resolute, agreed. If they spoke, it would not be for power. It would be for every person who had been made to prove their innocence simply for existing. So a public forum was announced. The city council chamber became a crucible, packed wall to wall with residents. Clergy filled one row, activists another. Local business owners, students, parents, and police officers sat shoulder to shoulder, the tension between them thick as smoke. Linda Shore arrived, flanked by a lawyer, her cheeks mottled red. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, clutching her purse like a shield. When the microphone passed to Naomi, her knees trembled, but her voice carried. She spoke of standing in her gown, forced to prove her love with paperwork. She told them about the fear in children's eyes, the way sirens had turned joy into terror. Her words cracked, but she did not stop. Aunt Rochelle followed, her cane tapping as she approached. Her testimony was fire-wrapped in steel. She spoke of decades of survival, of teaching children how to survive a police encounter with "yes, sir," and lowered eyes, and of the pain of seeing that same fear steal into her niece's wedding day. One by one, others rose. A white neighbor confessed he had once called the police on noise without thinking, realizing now the harm hidden in those casual decisions. Sergeant Park addressed the chamber, her voice firm. She explained how dispatchers triage calls, how bias slipped into reports like poison into a glass of water, and why training alone wasn't enough. There had to be consequences. Then Linda took the stand. Her words came in a rush, rehearsed and brittle. I'm not racist. I just care about safety, property values, quality of life. I didn't mean any harm. Her voice cracked under the weight of the murmurs that spread through the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others laughed bitterly. The questions cut deep. Why had a wedding been interpreted as danger? Why had a celebration been recast as a threat? When had black gatherings become guilty until proven innocent? Marcus finally stepped to the microphone. His tuxedo was gone, replaced by a simple suit, but his presence filled the chamber all the same. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid out the truth. What Linda had done was not just disruptive, it was dangerous. It was part of a pattern that had stolen lives in other cities, other neighborhoods. He proposed an ordinance, penalties for those who made unfounded, discriminatory emergency calls, fines, community service, mandatory education. The chamber erupted in debate, voices colliding, hands slamming desks, applause clashing with jeers. Yet beneath it all was a sense that something irreversible had been set in motion. The city could no longer hide from the mirror it had been forced to face. When the gavel finally struck, the council announced it would put Marcus's proposal to a vote. The air quivered with anticipation. Naomi squeezed her husband's hand as they rose from their seats. Justice was still out of reach, but its shadow had stretched closer. The day of the vote arrived with skies heavy and gray, as though the city itself held its breath. Inside the council chamber, every seat was taken, every hallway packed with citizens leaning against the walls. The murmur of conversation built and broke like waves against rocks until the council president raised the gavel. Roll call began, each name echoing with consequence. One by one, the votes fell. Yes, yes, yes. Alone no, followed by more affirmatives. When the final tally was announced, the ordinance passed with a decisive supermajority. Applause thundered through the chamber, some people rising to their feet, others weeping openly. For once, history had bent toward accountability. The law was clear, discriminatory, unfounded 911 calls were no longer harmless inconveniences. They would carry fines, mandatory education, and, in egregious cases, community service. The message was louder than any siren. Safety would no longer be built on suspicion. For Linda Shore, the consequences were swift. She was ordered to complete restorative justice classes, perform service with a nonprofit that organized weddings for underprivileged families, and issue a public apology. On the steps of City Hall, she stood stiffly at a podium, her voice monotone as cameras captured every word. She apologized for any distress caused, but her body betrayed her, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the crowd that now viewed her not as a concerned neighbor, but as a cautionary tale. Weeks later, the garden was transformed once again. Where once police lights had drowned the colors of roses, now sunlight poured freely over white chairs and bright petals. Music floated on the breeze, violins resuming the song that had been cut short. This time, there were no sirens, no interruptions, only the hum of community gathering again. Naomi walked down the aisle once more, not as a bride denied, but as a woman reclaiming her moment. The gown still fit, though she had altered the hem where it had once tangled in fear. Her grandmother clasped the heirloom locket at her neck, whispering, "This time, baby, it belongs to you." Marcus waited beneath the arch, not with the guarded posture of a man ready for battle, but with the open arms of a husband ready to begin anew. He had signed the ordinance that morning with the same pen he now held in his pocket, a quiet reminder that love and justice could be bound by ink as much as by vows. Among the guests sat officers in plain clothes, invited not as enforcers but as neighbors. Sergeant Elena Park was among them. Her presence met with nods of respect. Children laughed without fear, chasing each other between the chairs, their joy unshadowed. The ruined memories of the first ceremony had been rewritten by the vibrancy of this one. Naomi spoke first, her voice trembling but strong. "I'm not here to forgive on demand," she said, looking out at the crowd. "I am here to declare that we deserve ordinary joy. We deserve to love without proving that we belong." Her words carried over the garden, not bitter but resolute, a declaration no one could erase. When Marcus repeated his vows, his eyes never left hers. Cameras clicked, but they were irrelevant. The moment belonged only to them. He spoke of resilience, of love as defiance, of a city learning to unlearn what it thought was safety. And when they sealed their vows, the kiss was not just a promise between two people, but a public reclaiming of dignity. The bouquet was tossed again. This time it did not land in a gutter, but soared in a perfect arc, caught by a laughing cousin whose smile burst like sunlight. The crowd erupted in cheers, and as petals rained down over the garden, Naomi and Marcus knew they had turned a place of humiliation into a monument to survival. Their story was no longer just their own, it was the city's. And it would remind everyone who passed through that love, when tested, can become the most powerful form of justice. Thank you for watching till the very end. Stories like this remind us how fragile dignity can be and how powerful justice becomes when love refuses to be silenced. If you believe more people need to see the truth behind these moments, smash that like button, drop a comment about where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next story we're about to tell, it's even more shocking than this one.